VECNA the Archlich, VECNA the Undying King, VECNA the Whispered One. VECNA has been an iconic character through different editions of Dungeons & Dragons, and I was very excited when I discovered a stat block was coming. Capitalizing on the success of Stranger Things, Wizards of the Coast released a free addendum for all D&D Beyond users called VECNA Dossier, which contains some lore about the character and the stat block. Before we begin, remember that Wizards tend to never give stats for gods or godlike entities, so the VECNA portrayed by this dossier is explicitly said to be a version of himself before ascending to godhood. This makes sense because VECNA has mastered the ability to move through time. So if VECNA is a god in the pantheon of whatever setting you're playing, this creature can simply be explained as a past version of VECNA that came to the future. When I first read the dossier, I immediately knew I wanted to run this encounter. The stat block comes with an adventure prepared for 3 to 4 level 20 characters, which is supposed to last around 3 hours. Reading through it though, and knowing my players and my style of DMing, I knew this would have taken me much more time than that, time I didn't really have, so I decided to stick with running the dossier as a single encounter. And this took over 3 hours alone, so yeah, I gathered 4 players, I had them create level 20 characters, and I gave them a choice of 1 rare and 1 very rare magic item, and we played out the fight. And playing the stat block, I liked it. It felt unique, it felt powerful, it felt how I expected VECNA to feel. However, as the fight went on, I realized a couple of issues with it that can throw off the balance of the encounter. Now, before I continue, this issue did not take away from the fun of the game, and I still believe the stat block is very well made and an important step for Wizards of the Coast in the direction of making more unique monsters and encounters. However, when I inevitably run this encounter again, I will make some small adjustments here and there. So, let's go over the stat block. First, the actual stats. Aside from the weird fact that VECNA's wisdom is somehow higher than his intelligence, the stats are mostly fine. He has low HP at the first glance, but also has a very powerful healing ability, so they kind of cancel out. He has a very high proficiency bonus of +8, but having lived thousands of years possibly, that is no surprise and a detail that I quite enjoyed. Immunities and resistances are in line with a standard glitch, as I think they should be, and 5 legendary resistances. Now, having legendary resistances is pretty normal for a Bonds Master, which is, a tool for the Dungeon Master to make sure that their super strong boss doesn't go down to a bunch of stunning strikes or to something like banishment. But 5 of them, that's a lot. Then again, VECNA is a very powerful creature and clever, so it stands to reason that he would have some aces up his sleeves. The other interesting feature VECNA has is his Undying ability. VECNA can't be killed. If he dies, he simply comes back in another body in 1d100 years. Which Wizards of the Coast explained is their way of saying
whenever the DM wants.
VECNA has many unique offensive and defensive abilities, but the real change is that VECNA has no legendary actions. Instead, he has 2 unique named reactions he can use not once, not twice, but 3 times per round. This, to me, is a very welcome change from the honestly quite random mechanic of legendary actions. Feels much more natural and believable and makes the fight much more dynamic. First of all, VECNA has his own multi-attack, with him being able to use one of 3 abilities and attack twice with his dagger immediately after. The dagger, named
Afterthought,
deals decent damage at an average of 16 per attack, and has a lingering effect that deals damage and prevents healing at the start of a player's turn. I had one big issue with that, and that is something every Dungeon Master has to deal with at some point. Remembering delayed activations. What happened in my game is that I used the dagger, dealt the damage, described how the necrotic energy enveloped the character, but then in the heat of the fight I forgot to push the effect on the player's turn. And players themselves, excited to finally have their turn to act and do things, are notoriously not really reliable to remember these kind of things. So no heal block and no delayed damage. I don't really want to propose a fix for this. I think the effect works. It's just about remembering to carry out this effect in the heat of the moment. What I can suggest, and what I will do next time, is to mark the miniature or avatar with some sort of ring or counter. So at the start of the player's turn, we can visualize that we have something to remember. But this, as I said, are just the normal attacks. In addition, VECNA can spend his action to use either his Spellcasting or one of two unique named abilities,
Flight of the Damned and Rotten Fate.
VECNA's spellcasting has been simplified in line with the general changes that have been implemented in the 5th edition that are going in the direction of an easier to run game for the Dungeon Master. VECNA has a selection of spells at will, some others 3 times per day, and the higher levels at once per day. And that's it, simple, no spell slots. Except that, rules as written, VECNA has no access to higher level spell slots. And that's interesting when you realize that the strongest attacking spell that the Undying King has access to is a 3rd level Lightning Bolt, which deals an average of 24 damage. Like, nothing to scoff at, but not really the power I was expecting a soon-to-be god to wield. The spell list looks to me to have been selected to allow VECNA to be played in non-combat scenarios just as well, with utility spells such as Detect Magic or Scrying, and I really like this aspect. But when it comes to blows, in my opinion, he's a bit lacking. To fix this, I would just allow VECNA to cast his spells natural at a higher level, maybe like 5th, to deal a little more damage and to avoid being counterspelled too easily. Another option could be to just increase the amount of spells VECNA has access to. And I will add that this being an option is hinted at by the dossier, because at the center of VECNA's ribcage lies the fabled Book of Vile Darkness, which pages contain all sorts of dark formulas that can be used to explain and extend the spell list for the Archlich. His other 2 abilities are named and unique to VECNA. It is more or less an unwritten rule to give strong monsters both a native effect attack to deal damage to multiple creatures at once and provide a bit of crowd control, and a strong focused attack to damage a single target for a lot of hit points, what I call the fuck you attack. VECNA is no exception. The Archlich has access to Flight of the Damned, a massive 120 feet cone. I had to cut one out just for this because I never used one this big, that deals necrotic damage and frightens all those who fail a very hard saving throw. The damage of this attack though is somewhat lackluster, at only 36 damage average, before eventual resistances or successful saves. To put this into perspective, one of my players had necrotic resistance and succeeded on the save, so this ability that has a recharge and that I envisioned as this like spirit bomb style ultimate attack dealt a grand total of 9 damage to them, which honestly is pretty tame. To solve this, I would love this effect to last more than a single turn, with the cone remaining active and VECNA being able to move it around the battlefield, keeping him locked into the casting of this ability until he chooses to drop it. The fuck you attack, Rotten Fate, is the complete opposite. It not only deals a whopping average of 100 damage to the target creature, but if they die from it, there is the zombies, which effectively denies them death saving throws. They're just dead. I have some issues with this ability as well. Like, insta-kill powers may have their place in a campaign making for these emotional scenes and narratives, but in a one-shot, which is going to be by far the most common occurrence of a monster with a challenge rating of 26, not so much. Imagine you're a player who takes the time to show up for a one-shot, having poured hours into the creation of a character to just see it dead in 2 or 3 rounds with no possibility of coming back in the fight. Some people may be fine with this. I personally know myself and my players, and I know for certain they would not enjoy it. To solve this without fundamentally altering how the effect works is very difficult. What one could do is to simply allow the death saving throw anyway, and only if all 3 fail, then turn the player into zombie. Well, the character into zombie. This way, with how prominent healing is in 5th edition, it becomes much more difficult for this added effect to proc, and the attack just becomes a very dependable way of dealing consistent damage to the players. And if they still manage to get turned to zombies, well, they had their chance. All in all, I am not really convinced by VECNA's offensive abilities. I believe they are going to the right direction, but I almost feel like when Wizard created this stat block, they had in mind a much weaker party than the actual average, being able to deal and take much less damage. My impression is that VECNA struggles to be a real threat, unless the Dungeon Master plays him optimally, only using the strong attack Rotten Fate on one character at a time, a tactic that may create some ill feelings at the table though. This is why in my one-shot I decided to give VECNA an ally. A Dracolich, no less, that he raised in front of the players from the corpse of a deceased dragon. And this is not out of the realm of what VECNA can do, like he is able to raise dead at will, and my players didn't question it for a second. But even with a Dracolich, I felt the battle not being as deadly as expected, further confirming my feeling that VECNA is simply not built for a direct confrontation. He's a schemer, he's wise and clever, he doesn't play by the rules, and that is why he doesn't work offensively as well, and I understand that. But still, I would have liked him to have the means to do it, even if it's not what he would generally go for. Defensively though, the situation is very different. I really think that VECNA's defenses have been built perfectly, making him really stand out as a unique boss monster. His defense hinges around movement. VECNA is impossible to tie down, thanks to two different sources of teleportation. As a bonus action, VECNA has access to
Vile Teleport,
an ability that allows him to teleport up to 30 feet, dealing a little bit of damage to all creatures around, and if at least one creature takes this damage, he regains a whopping 80 hit points. That is one of the most powerful healing abilities in the game, clearly developed to give VECNA survivability and allow him to stay much longer in the fight. I think this ability solves one of the most relevant issues about higher level monsters, nominally being large bags of hit points that make for long and sometimes tedious fights. VECNA has relatively low HP for his challenge rating, but his healing ability complements it very well, while keeping the fight interesting and dynamic. There is one issue with it. If the party numbers start to dwindle, or in general if the party struggles to deal at least 80 damage per turn, that is a mathematic loss. No epic stand by the last party member who takes down the big baddie alone before succumbing to their wounds. The battle is just lost due to math, and VECNA isn't known for taking prisoners. However, as long as the DM keeps tabs on this and doesn't abuse the healing, this shouldn't be a big deal, but you can just cap it at, say, 3 times per day, and that's a very simple fix. Teleporting, after all, is something that VECNA can do very easily anyway. One of the 2 unique reactions he has allows him to teleport immediately after being hit by an attack, which has the interesting possibility of breaking chains of attacks if the attacker can't reach VECNA back during the turn. Picture this. A melee character runs up to VECNA and attacks 3 times. But as the first hit connects, VECNA disappears and reappears in a different place, maybe on top of a tall pillar. If the fighter has no way to reach VECNA this turn, they simply won't be able to take the remaining 2 attacks in their attack action. This makes VECNA very good to deal with melee fighters, but what about spellcasters? Well, the second name reaction that VECNA has at his disposal is a version of Counterspell that is unique to him. This ability,
Dread Counterspell,
works automatically on any spell of level 4 or lower with an intelligence check may require for higher levels. Kind of like normal Counterspell works. In my opinion, this is the most interesting of VECNA's abilities, and for good reasons. First of all, being an ability and not a spell, this cannot be Counterspell back. Second, it can be used up to 3 times per round, which allows VECNA to deal efficiently even with more than one caster. But most importantly, this may look broken, but while still being very powerful as an ability, it is actually pretty balanced. And this is because the ability requires an intelligence check against a DC of 10 plus the spell level. VECNA has an intelligence modifier, plus 6. This means that whenever VECNA is trying to counterspell a spell of 5th level or higher, he has roughly a 50% chance, give or take depending on the spell's level, to fail, which makes it not reliable. This means that while VECNA is able to deal effectively with spellcasters, he's not a complete shutdown of their abilities. Still, he feels like he has the ability to tamper with their attunement to the Weave of Magic, as you would expect from such a powerful wizard. I think this ability is amazing, and it works perfectly, as is. If I had to make a change, I would maybe tie VECNA's ability to counterspell to his health. As his HP reaches certain thresholds, I would reduce its counterspell modifier, making it feel that as the players deal damage to VECNA and wound him, his control over the Weave of Magic falters and fails as he struggles to survive. I think this could make for a very compelling narrative, but once again, I really think this ability is very good as is, and I wouldn't really change it. So, to recap, what changes I would like to implement. First, I would give VECNA access to higher level spell slots. Second, I would change the Flight of the Damned ability to possibly work over multiple turns if VECNA so chooses. 3, I would still allow death saving throws with the Rotten Fate ability. 4, I would limit the healing power of Vile Teleport to a number of times per day. And 5, optional, tie the counterspell modifier to a specific health threshold. In conclusion, I think that VECNA is built to be fun to run, not only to fight against. I, as Dungeon Master, enjoyed running this encounter, and even though I feel like there have been some design choices that are not completely sound, the general flow of the fight works very nicely. The Dungeon Master just needs to keep tabs on certain things to not have the fight get out of hand. I think that VECNA was built for what he's supposed to be. The strong end-game character that doesn't play by the rules, is hard to catch and even harder to kill. And I really believe that this was done masterfully, and overall I'm giving this monster a solid 8 out of 10. I may have some qualms here and there with certain aspects, but don't be fooled, like, I think the Wizards really is showing us what they can do in terms of good game design. And I really encourage them to keep doing this going forward. All in all, I'm very happy on how Wizards of the Coast managed to portray such an iconic character. And I'm sure I will be playing this again soon enough. But I've been Pietro, Dungeon Master of Fablescape, and until next time, take care.